Okay, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of your time. My name is Rachel Jimenez, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement, and I just want to welcome you to the How to Deal with Student Loan Debt webinar. Crystal Gamma from CGU, she's the Director of Financial Aid, will be our presenter. Before I get to her bio and introducing her, I want to just do a little rundown, some reminders from the Alumni Office. So housekeeping, if you haven't already, just type a yes in the chat box or let me know that you can hear me. And no, if you cannot, they won't be able to hear me, but hopefully they'll be able to hear that in the, or be able to see that in the PowerPoint. Everyone is muted, so if you, thank you, Yvonne, I saw that. If you have any questions, please pose them in the chat box and I will be reading them to Crystal at the end so she can answer those. If a question comes up in the middle and I think it makes sense to interrupt her, I'll do that as well, so feel free to keep the questions coming. What's new at CGU? So we just had a recent edition of the Flame magazine come out. I mentioned this, it should have been mailed to you. If for some reason you didn't get it, we might not have a correct mailing address on file for you, so you may be missing out on invitations to events, the Flame magazine, and other important notices from the school. Also, if we don't have your address, your current address, we may be sending you events and emails that are for events that are not local to you. So if you used to live in New York and now you live in LA and we still have your New York address, you're only going to get events about the New York events when we have a lot more going on in the LA area. So please make sure you send me an email, get a hold of me somehow. You can call me and I'll have all that contact information later in this presentation so that we can update that for you. I just sent out an upcoming events email I think it was on Saturday. So that has all the upcoming events. So if we have your email address on file, that might be how you found out about this. But we also did a Facebook ad to market this webinar. So if for some reason you didn't get that upcoming events email, I would check your junk mail, check your email, and if you don't see it again, please send me an email and we can get your updated email address on file so that we make sure that you're getting all the great information and news from the school. And then a new thing that we have as well is the school-based e-newsletters. So we have CG Universe, which lets you know about all the amazing things that are going on at the school, but then we also have school-based e-newsletters that will let you know specifically if you're a Drucker alum, for example, what amazing things are happening there. If you're from the School of Educational Studies, what your faculty members, the current students, and the alumni office in that area are doing. And then we do have a website as well that's been updated if you haven't looked at it. So I would highly recommend going to cgu.edu/alumni. If this is your first time on a professional development webinar, I put all the recordings on this website. It's under benefits and then I believe professional development webinars, and we've had some really amazing ones, so you might want to take a look at that. And all future ones will be there as well. So if you check back every couple weeks or every month or so, you'll probably see a new webinar if you missed out on it. And there's tons of alumni benefits that you might not be aware that you have, so I'd highly recommend that you check those out and use them. And then the next webinar that we have is on October 10th. It's networking, it's all about building connections. And that one is being taught by a education alum that's a principal, and she may or may not have gotten her job because of who she knew. So I think that will be a really interesting webinar. And then we also have the Career Development Office that if you aren't using and you need it, please feel free to use. Alumni get that benefit for life. So this is the website if you want more information. And then Handshake Job Portal is fairly new. So if you graduated more than a year or two out, you may or may not be aware of this, but you can join it if you haven't already. Just go to this, it's cgu.joinhandshake.com, request an account, and then you can also make appointments via this portal, review job postings and upcoming events. And the really cool thing is that this is through all of the 7 Claremont colleges. So if there's a job that Harvey Mudd gets, you will be able to see it as well, and you can apply for that position. And then we also are interested in doing more events and webinars. So if you are interested in getting involved, if you have something you would like to share that would add value to your fellow alumni, a lot of people use this as a platform as well to promote their business in a very soft way, but that's okay with me if they're giving something for free away to the alumni, which is valuable information. If you want to host an event or are interested in just planning something with me in your area because maybe you're not very close to where a lot of alumni events are happening, then I'd be happy to do that with you. And then make sure you keep an eye on your inbox and in social media for upcoming alumni events. And then I'm really excited, if you haven't heard me talk about this already, we have a new alumni directory and mentoring platform called Campus Tap. And so if you go to cgu.thecampustapp.com, if you haven't already, you can request an account. This is similar to LinkedIn, only it's a private network, so only CGU alumni have access to this. And the thing that's different than LinkedIn is if you find somebody that you're interested in meeting with, you want an informational interview or something with them on LinkedIn, it could be an alum or it could be a total stranger, but you have no idea if they want to talk to you. On Campus Tap, when you first register, you can opt in or opt out to whether or not you want to be a mentor or be menteed. So rather than going on LinkedIn and finding somebody and then you have no idea if they're willing to help you, on this platform, when you request to talk to somebody, it will pop up, it'll populate and say where they're willing to help. So they might be willing to be a mentor, they might just be looking to connect with people, but they might be willing to do informational interviews, review resumes, or help you in other ways. So it's really helpful to be able to kind of break down that barrier and know what ways people are willing to help each other in the alumni network. And it's just a great networking tool. So I'd highly recommend checking that out and using that. And then finally, feel free to keep in touch with me. Email me anytime. My number is 909-607-9226. Feel free to call me if there's anything I can help with. If you're a Drucker alum, you should know about Shaheen Punier, who's the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, and she specifically works with Drucker alumni. And then we are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and also make sure you update your contact information, which I was talking about earlier, so you can send me an email, or if you want to just go to this website, you can update all your information there as well. So without further ado, let me read Crystal's bio and give you some information about her, and then we'll get started. So Crystal is the Director of Financial Aid at Claremont Graduate University. As the Director, she serves as a senior member of the Student Services and Enrollment Management teams and has over 13 years of financial aid experience at both undergraduate and graduate universities. In her current role, she is responsible for administrating financial aid programs in accordance with federal guidelines and institutional policies and procedures. In addition to ensuring compliance, she counsels students and alumni on debt management and responsible borrowing. So let me pass the presentation over to her, and then we will go ahead and get started. Crystal, you are now unmuted as well.
Okay, so hopefully now everyone can hear me rather than hearing Rachel. Please let me know if you cannot, or let Rachel know. She'll be able to see in the chat box also. But thank you for coming and taking the time to talk about loan debt. I know there are some current events or some recent news that has come up, so many of you may have already seen that, and I'll touch on that in just a minute. But basically today's presentation is to review your loan history or knowing where to go for that, the actual repayment process, what some of the repayment options are, touch on public service loan forgiveness, that recent news, responsible borrowing if you are going to continue on with your education, and just some available resources that I have for you. First and foremost, we want to start with your loan history. Some of you may be recent graduates, some of you may have been in repayment for quite a while, but I do want to make sure that you're aware of where to go to see how much you've borrowed, where to look to see the status of those current loans, and who your loan servicer is. If you have not been in contact with your loan servicer, maybe they don't have your current address, phone number, email address, so they may be sending you information and you may not even know who they are. Maybe you think it's junk mail. So all of those answers you can find on both studentloans.gov and NSLDS, which is our National Student Loan Database System. Both of those are great resources to identify all of your history. You can literally see loan by loan, or if you've consolidated, the total amount of your loan history and the loans that you are showing in consolidation. So everything from the beginning of your academic career until now. Now moving into sort of the repayment process. So like I said, you may have already started the repayment process. Maybe you haven't begun that process yet, but typically repayment begins 6 months after graduation or after you drop below half-time status. That 6 months that I'm referring to is your actual grace period. So there is a 6-month period that you get on a one-time basis of when you either drop below half-time status as a student or you've graduated or completed a degree before you actually have to start repayment. So that 6-month period, you're not responsible for making any payments, although you may because that interest is accruing. Deferment versus forbearance. Many students confuse what the forbearance versus deferment means. So essentially, deferment allows you to stop making payments altogether. So deferment will allow you during that period, for whatever reason, there's many reasons why you can defer your loans. Let's say, for instance, in school, if you're enrolled at least half time, you can get an in-school deferment request. If you are on active duty, let's say you're in the military and you go into active duty, you can apply for a deferment or forbearance for that as well. There's several different reasons why you may be able to qualify for those, but that is just a temporary stop on making any payments based on whatever your situation is. So interest doesn't accrue on subsidized or Perkins loans during that process, but any unsubsidized or Grad Plus loans that you may have received, at least in your graduate career, will still be accruing interest during that time. Now, the difference with forbearance is that, yes, you're temporarily able to stop making payments, but the interest is always accruing, no matter what type of loan it is, whether it's subsidized, Perkins, unsubsidized, plus loan, et cetera. So that is what that difference would look like for you. So that's still interest that's accruing. Now, when does interest begin to accrue? Another common question that students aren't aware of. It has begun accruing interest the day that the loan has dispersed. If you had prior loans that were Perkins loans or subsidized loans, it didn't start accruing until you went into your grace period. However, any funds that you would have received from CGU as unsubsidized loans or plus loans, that interest began accruing the day it dispersed. So if you chose to make interest-only payments while you were in school, that's great. If you did not, just know that that interest has now been added to your principal and capitalized on that. So now you're not only paying towards that principal amount that you took out, but you're also paying towards the interest that's accrued thus far. When is interest capitalized? So just to give you, not only is it when you go into repayment, but it's also when a deferment ends, when a forbearance ends, if you defaulted on a loan, if you changed your repayment plan, so if you applied for a different one, maybe an income-based repayment plan, et cetera, or if you consolidate your loans. All of those are instances where your interest will then become capitalized. So any additional amount that you would have accrued now becomes part of your principal payment. So standard repayment options. Each of you may already know what those payment options are if you completed your exit counseling. So maybe either A, you're dreading your first payment, or maybe you haven't made any payments thus far, or maybe you have been making payments and it's just too much based on how much you're earning and you're kind of struggling to make those payments. Kind of take a look at your repayment options, contact your loan servicer, or log on to studentloans.gov and see if you can apply for a different repayment plan. But just to kind of overview it, take a minute to discuss what those options would look like. The first one is just your standard repayment. It is the defaulted payment once you go into, once you drop below the half-time status or when your grace period ends after graduation. It is essentially your entire amount of loans that you've taken out distributed evenly amongst 120 payments. So 10 years straight of consecutive payments evenly broken down for you. Depending on how much you've taken out will determine ultimately what that monthly payment would look like for you, but just to give you an idea, if you've taken out, let's say, $50,000 under a standard repayment plan, that would mean you would have about $575 a month that you're paying from now until the next 10 years, so 120 payments. Now, if you move into a graduated repayment, it's still 120 payments, but rather than paying an equal amount, maybe the first year or two right out of school, you're not able to find the career that you're looking for. So maybe a lower payment would work for you now, but you anticipate making more in the future. So up front, let's say they give you a small payment of $100. And that $100 will keep with you for 2 years, and then the next 2 years it'll move up to, let's say, $200. And the following 2 years, then it moves up to $300. So it will continuously or gradually move up over that 10-year payment period, so that you overall will still pay the total amount of loans that you took out, but at a gradual pace. Then you have the extended repayment plan. So rather than using the standard repayment, maybe you just need it dragged out a bit longer so that you can repay all of the loans. So they can extend it to 15 or even 25 years. So it would be a total of 300 payments you would be making equally dispersed amongst those 25 years. Okay, now we'll move into income-based repayments. These are what is currently, I guess, the most utilized or the most shown the most interest by recent borrowers. So first is a pay-as-you-earn plan, or what was recently revised, I believe, a year and a half ago to revised pay-as-you-earn plan. So what that does is for anyone who meets the qualifications, there's a certain income bracket and household size that will determine whether or not you would go into this repayment plan, rather a different income-driven repayment plan. But they will take either 10, depending on if you started with the pay-as-you-earn, or 15% under the revised pay-as-you-earn plan for discretionary income. So let's say a whole, they're looking at the totality of what your income is. You're sending that information to your loan servicer, and they, based on how many people are in your household, they determine what that percentage of discretionary income might look like. You're going to provide to them all the necessary information that they request, but they'll calculate what that 10% or that 15% of your income is that's considered discretionary, so not geared towards your mortgage payment or your necessary bills to get by, but whatever is left over, they'll take 10 or 15% of that, and that would be your new payment. Okay, so if you're married, then they're going to look at both incomes. They're not just going to look at yours. Some people have joined or consolidated their loans with their spouse, but they would be looking at all of them regardless of whether you did that. Okay. Now, if you don't qualify for pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn, then you would qualify potentially for the income-based repayment. The income-based repayment is, again, looking at either 10 or 15% of your discretionary income, but it's calculated on a yearly basis. So you would consistently provide your updated annual income amounts to your loan servicer, and they would recalculate what that new payment would look like. So it can change from year to year. If the first year out of college you're like, well, you know, I just ended up having to get something, so I'm not making and earning as much as I anticipated, but maybe the next year you are. So the first one you may qualify for income-based repayment, but maybe the following year they end up pushing you back into a standard, or what looks like more of a standard repayment amount. Okay. Again, if you're married, your spouse's income is considered, but only if you filed a joint tax return. So if you filed married filing separately or head of household because you're separated but you're still in a married status legally, that they take that information into account, and they also take into account your debt-to-income ratio. So that is something that is extremely helpful. And under either one of these plans, the overall benefit is anything that is not paid off by the end of a 20 or 25-year repayment plan would then be forgiven. So regardless of whether you're working for a public agency or whether you they don't anticipate your income ever changing above the amount that they've been receiving, they will just forgive any remaining loan amount that you have outstanding. Moving into responsible future borrowing. If you decide to go back to school, let's say you just received your master's degree, but you're looking at a PhD, or maybe you completed a PhD, but you want to get a secondary one. If you decide to return to school on a half-time basis or more, basically you have the option of putting your loans back into deferment. But what we always recommend to students is that you reduce the amount of borrowing from that point on, especially if you are working and are capable of making some sort of payment towards your previous loans. Either reduce the amount of your loans that you're obtaining now and either compensate for that difference, by making payments while you're in school, or just minimizing it to the exact amount of your tuition, especially if you're doing continuous registration or doctoral studies, because that fee is so small. We want to make sure that you're only taking out as much as you need, and if you're able to, make sure to pay the interest while you're going to school. Now, public service loan forgiveness. This has been a popular topic, and I will touch on it again in the recent news section. But this is an opportunity for those that are employed by a government or a nonprofit organization. And keep in mind, it's not for all nonprofit organizations. They say you may be eligible to receive this loan forgiveness under public service loan forgiveness program, but the may is whether or not it is a qualified position and whether the amount of hours that you're working qualifies as full-time. So keep that in mind. You want to do more research, and I'll give you a little bit more information if you're interested in it. I can go over all the details with you, or give you the necessary websites to research on your own to ensure that your employer is actually qualified for this. But it's available to those who borrowed any federal direct loans on or after the year of 2007. So if you received any loans under the Federal Family Educational Loan Program, then those loans do not qualify. However, if you borrowed both loan types, so both federal direct loans and the federal family educational loans, then you have the opportunity to consolidate both of those loans in order to qualify for this loan forgiveness program. So, and if you're not sure, utilize that studentloans.gov or that NSLDS website to see which types of loans you have outstanding and if you might qualify for this program in the future. If you are qualified or believe that you qualify, you would complete a public service loan forgiveness employment certification form with your loan servicer. You would submit that to them, and you would be making 120 payments while working full-time for a qualified employer, and you must use some sort of income-based repayment plan, meaning you would not be able to completely pay off all of your outstanding debt within a 10-year period. So if you're just in a standard repayment and you're doing 120 payments, there will be remaining after that 10-year period. So if you have, if you're under the pay, if you're under the repay, if you're under income-based, then you would qualify for this, because then you would have outstanding debt after that 120 payments have been made, and then you would submit what's called your public service loan forgiveness application for forgiveness, and that's ultimately the last and final amount that you confirm that you are no longer responsible for borrowing. They will cancel, or AKA forgive that debt for you, and you don't have to make any further payments after that. So in recent news, there have been some proposals that have come up, not only during this most recent administration, but also during the Obama administration. Essentially what the idea is, the changes that would come up are that they would either cancel the program or make modifications to how the application process works, modify how many employers or what type of employers would qualify you for this position, et cetera. So that's still sort of up in the air at this point, because this is the first year that any students would get loans forgiven, because keep in mind when I said direct loans on or after 2007. So actually October of 2017 would be the first month that any qualified student would be able to have their loans forgiven. So they would just be submitting their application for forgiveness now and saying, okay, I made my 120 payments. I already certified that my employer qualifies. Now it's time to forgive my loans. So once that happens, we'll really truly see how the government will react based on how many applications they have, how much that debt burden will be on the government, et cetera, and we'll kind of see what will happen moving forward. But as of right now, everything's still set in stone. None of the qualifiers have changed in the last 10 years, so we'll see what it's like moving forward. But just so you know, that is going to be the first set within the next, 3 days submitting their forgiveness applications and see the result. There have been also several lawsuits that have been filed, and I know one specifically has a hearing that will come forth next month. But because they, when they applied back almost 10 years ago, and mind you, I'll just give you kind of a brief overview of this lawsuit just in terms of time. I want to make sure we get to all of your questions afterward. But to give you kind of an idea of what happened in this particular lawsuit that I'm referring to is it's 4 separate attorneys who are working for a nonprofit organization had filed and been making their 120 payments towards their loans and were recently notified, or I believe notified last year, that the loan forgiveness wouldn't apply to them because the type of agency that they are working for, it doesn't qualify and doesn't meet all the definitions that have been put forth recently, so they no longer qualify. So although they've been making these payments, they will continue to make those payments until their outstanding debt has been paid. So because of the type of agency that they work for and the classification that it has for tax purposes, they overall are trying to fight that. So I'm sure there's going to be more and more lawsuits of those who don't fall quite into that meeting all of the needs and all of the criteria that's required for this forgiveness program, but maybe appear to have been meeting it at the start and feel they have met all of their obligations and should have their loans forgiven. So I'm sure, moving forward, we'll see a few of those, and it may or may not affect the actual forgiveness program. The other thing that has been in recent news is that pay-repay repayment plan. Because it was changed I believe it was 1 or 2 years ago into that repay option, what they're looking is just trying to move the two into one actual repayment option. So whether you started and qualified for it when it was considered the pay repayment plan or whether you qualified under the repay repayment plan, the Trump administration has basically proposed to combine those 2 repayment plans, which would then average out the discretionary income. Rather than 10 or 15%, it would then become a 12% amount of their discretionary income. And then rather than being 20 or 25 years of payments before the remainder is forgiven, they're looking at as little as 15 years. So definitely something that could benefit those that were in that 15% discretionary income level, and overall for both repayment plans now having a shorter repayment period. So we'll see what the outcome is of that. Again, it's still a proposal and in that stage, so nothing is finite yet. But if you do choose one of those options, just know that the repayment terms may change. Okay, so just to stay in communication with your loan servicer. Oftentimes, you change your number, you move, you change your employer. They're not able to get in contact you. You end up missing a payment if you're not already scheduled for automatic payments. And maybe your situation changes. Maybe you had a loss of job. Maybe you had a career change. Whatever the case may be, and you're not able to make the payments on time or maybe make that amount in your payment. Stay in communication with them. Let them know what's happening so that they can assist you. There's so many options for you and for you to not make your payment. We don't want you to go into default. We want you to be successful, and they will work with you. Maybe it's only in a 3-month period or a 6-month period or a 1-year period, but they will work with you in the meantime, okay? So contact them, see if you have a deferment options for deferment or forbearance or an income-driven repayment plan. Some resources, so I already touched on 2 of them. One of them that I have not touched on is the studentaid.ed.gov. That is the federal site that's available for all information regarding consolidation, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, default, loan cancellation options, etc. So it goes over what all the qualifiers are. It gives you a list of what criteria is used to make that determination of who's eligible for it, who's not, etc. So if you aren't sure, if you want more information, more detailed information, that's definitely a good start to go to. The studentloans.gov, again, is just our website. I'm hoping that you're familiar with it. Unless you haven't obtained loans in the last few years, then you may not be, but that is the one-stop shop for all information for you specifically. So you would sign in using your FSA ID and password, and it will give you all of your loan history. It'll give you the ability to apply for future loans, to complete your counseling, see all your previous master promissory notes, so your loan agreements that you signed for each loan will be there. If you are looking at doing a new repayment plan, it can calculate what those figures would look like. So if you're like, well, I'm kind of leaning towards this one, and I know I qualify for both, I want to see what that amount would look like for me, you can calculate that in there. If you're considering consolidation and want to see what the differences are between if you don't consolidate versus if you do, that information is in there. So utilize your resources. The studentaid.ed.gov, that is the database system in which all of your federal aid history will be there. So not just your loans, it will include grant history, your enrollment history, everything that has been transmitted from each institution that you have attended will be there. So keep that in mind. And then, like I said, stay in contact with your loan servicer. If you're not sure who they are, they very well may be one of these that are listed here. If you have been getting notifications from someone who is claiming to be your loan servicer and you're like, I'm not sure if that's actually, just, phishing information via email, or if it's truly, in fact, my loan servicer, or maybe it's changed over the years, you can always contact us. We can always check for you who your current loan servicer is, and make sure that you stay in contact with them. So we'll get you all their contact information, make sure you have everything on file. And last but not least, stay connected with our office. Rosie and I are available for you Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. If you, I understand if you are working and you're unable to get physically to us, but know that we are available on a walk-in basis to go over repayment options and consolidation and what is this, idea of income-based repayment, or do you think I would qualify for public loan forgiveness? Rather than contacting your loan servicer and waiting on hold for a while, if you just feel more comfortable coming in and seeing us, feel free to come in and see us. We're available to you. And that is all. I'm sure that we have some questions, so I will turn it back over to Rachel, and she can kind of assist us with displaying those questions for us.
Perfect. Thank you, Crystal. You can go ahead and leave your slides up. I'll just leave you with the presentation. Everybody,
Okay.
If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll wait for just a couple of seconds to see if anybody has questions, but go ahead and start typing those, and then I will read them, and Crystal will answer them for you. And I'll start with a question, Crystal. If somebody, let's say they've been working at a nonprofit, but they've just been making normal payments, they've never signed up for anything special, can they get the income forgiveness, or is that not allowed? Like, I guess the question is, will they count years previous if you haven't already applied, but you've been working at a nonprofit?
They may be. Not all payments may be considered for future forgiveness. So what I would recommend is submit your application on the employer certification now. If you've been working for that same employer and you have been making those payments since you've been working for that employer after you finish school, then you can certainly apply for that to be forgiven. I can't guarantee that they will use all of it. Let's say we've had some situations where they didn't take them because let's say they were a faculty and they were only an adjunct faculty or adjunct professor for a period of time, and that because they weren't working the equivalent of full-time hours or had a full workload, that part didn't qualify, but once they moved into that full-time work, then it did.
Okay.
But the sooner the actual certification form is filed, and as soon as they can review the actual loan history, then they would be able to move forward and let them know what will qualify and what will not.
Okay, perfect. Somebody asked, once you start paying interest-only payments, does interest stop accruing?
If you're making interest-only payments, and mind you, when you make payments, it's looking at all of your loan history, okay? So if you have outstanding loans from, 4 separate years, those are 4 separate loans that you have. So if you're only making interest-only payments, that amount that you're choosing to pay hopefully is enough to cover all of the interest that's accruing for each one of those loans. So they will tell you how much is accruing on the current loan when they send you your disclosure statement each semester, but you want to make sure that you're looking at the overall amount that is accruing so that you're paying into each one of those loans so that no interest is then, moving forward. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. We'll see if she has any follow-up questions. So here's
Okay.
another one. When my Apple grant of $3,000 was paid towards my loan, it said that it would be applied to the principal, but when I checked, it showed only $503 to the principal and the remaining went to interest.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a question there, but maybe you can answer that comment.
So essentially what ends up happening when any form of payment comes through and you don't have loans consolidated, it's looking at your entire history and it calculates a percentage of what needs to go to each loan. So let's say out of your entire let's say you took out $100,000 in loans and your most recent loan was only 20% of that. So, okay, so you have $20,000 in the last one. So it's going to give 20% to that loan and then divvy up the rest of that, 80% amongst the other loans that you have there. So it tries to equally, or I should say proportionally, add that payment towards each loan. Now, if you consolidated your loans all into one principal amount with one set of interest, then it would be applied to both interest and principal for that one loan.
Okay. Another one, so PSLF is based on income-based repayment. My spouse and I make too much and this program doesn't help. Would filing separately on taxes make a significant difference?
If basically the intent of the program is to state that those that are working for either nonprofit agencies or working in public service, so local, state, or federal government, they would not typically be making the same amount as if they were working for the private industry. So they're hoping that with this, it would help alleviate some of that burden of debt that you have, but they're looking at your income to debt ratio. So if you're saying, okay, we make plenty of money so that, or according to them, you don't qualify for, let's say, an income-based or an income-contingent repayment plan, but maybe I qualify for the repay, or vice versa. They're going to look at, okay, based on the household size, based on how much income, can you qualify for this? If you don't qualify for any of the income-based repayment plans or income-driven repayment plans, they will not, it would not qualify you for public service loan forgiveness. Although you may be working in that sector, based on your income and comparison to their standards, then you wouldn't qualify for the program.
Okay. So people, if you have any other questions, please feel free to type them in. I'll ask a question. Another one. So, because I feel like I have a lot of friends and alumni that I know, so they don't necessarily qualify for any of the programs that they're aware of. They make it a decent amount of money to where they wouldn't qualify for those, but they still feel like they are strapped for cash. They're, maybe a young family starting a family, having kids, and or they're trying to buy a house, things like that. Do you have just general tips for if they don't qualify for these programs, how can they go about getting out of this and, this financial burden? And I think it just can be overwhelming because it's this huge amount potentially, and it will take so long to pay off. So are there any general tips that you give people if they don't qualify for any of the programs?
Usually the ones that have, let's say, that they feel overburdened because of their income to debt ratio, and that's the most common thing. It may not be that they aren't able to make that small payment, or let's say their payment is $100 and they're able to make that $100, but by placing that $100 in there, that's less they have for food, that's less they have for gas, that's less they have for anything else that they would normally have budgeted for that. That's why they want to look at the discretionary income, and they're going to look at an income contingent or an income-based plan. Now, it may only bring their, according to the federal government's calculation, it may only bring their payment down by, $30, $40, anything, but any little bit helps. So I would say stay in contact with them or see if you can qualify for a temporary forbearance or temporary deferment. Say, look, I'm just strapped for cash right now. This is my situation. What can I do? They work with you. So they say, okay, maybe you don't qualify for one of these repayment plans, but let's see if you qualify for, let's see, a forbearance. And we'll say it's financial hardship. So for 3 months, for the next 3 months, we're not going to ask anything of you. Now, the interest would still accrue, but then you're not forced to make any payments for the next 3 months. And then once that period has gone and passed, then you would start back with making those payments.
Okay. Okay. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. Do you have any final tips or tricks that you think we should know?
I mean, there's so many different things based on individual cases, and it's really hard to generalize. Only thing I would say, come by and see us because we can look at your overall debt, we can look at your income situation, and sort of calculate what that figure should really look like for you versus what they're saying it is, and then kind of see what your options are individually. Okay, perfect. And we do have one other question. So somebody asked, how do we make an appointment with you and what information do we need to bring with us? Okay, so no appointment is necessary. You can literally come by anytime between 8:30 and 5. I know Rosie's only here in the mornings, but I am available all day. So feel free to stop by. If you want to, based on your schedule, want to schedule something, you can just send me an email. I believe my email address is still up on your screen at crystal.gamma@cgu.edu. Send me an email. Let me know what time works best for you so I can make sure to block off that at least an hour of my time. Not to say it would take that long, but just to make sure that we have sufficient time to go over your situation. I should have access, especially if you've been at CGU for in the last maybe 5 years or so. We should have access to all of your information to look it up. But really all I need is your Social Security number, your date of birth, and your name, and I can look up any history that you've had here or at previous institutions, and we can go over your information. If you have your taxes from the last year, that may be helpful in just determining your overall household income and household size. But if you want to verbally guesstimate what that looks like, we can still get a roundabout amount for you. Okay, and we do have more questions coming in now, so that was it was good to give them a few more minutes. So would divorce be a good reason to use the income-driven repayment plan if the couple makes too much money together? And then there's a fault. Has anyone done this before to your knowledge? I haven't seen that necessarily happen. I'm sure the loan servicers have. I know that debt is definitely an issue that does come up when it comes to repayment. So I'm sorry, when I'm talking about debt, I mean like their debt ratio with everything combined with them and their spouse, or sometimes they get married not realizing what their spouse has in debt and then ends up divorcing and having just to separate that income. It is possible for you to do that, but I mean, I'd have to look at your exact case and see how that would benefit you, because that's one less person in the household. Or let's say you have children, then you have to determine who is actually the head of household, who has who can utilize those dependents as part of their household for that calculation and who cannot, et cetera. Gotcha. And then somebody asked for appointments. Can they set up a phone appointment if they're no longer in the area? Yes, absolutely. We do phone appointments as well, so that's certainly an option for those that can't be, close to campus and are not local to us. Okay, perfect. And if somebody wanted to also work also. Email. And if they wanted to, instead of just dropping in just in case, they were worried that you might be sick or something one day, they could always schedule, email you and try to schedule a specific time, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then another question. While discussing repay, Crystal described discretionary income as what's left over after mortgage, et cetera. But my understanding is that it is a percentage based on your income over the poverty rate or some other fixed number. Yeah, so what they'll have you do, and the calculator is available online, but it will have you go through a series of questions that will ask you, okay, What is your marital status? If you put single, married, etc., that changes the calculation. What is your income or your annual salary? What is your spouse's, if applicable? How many people are in your household? Or do you have any other dependents that you provide 50% or more support for? Enter here, that sort of thing. And then it'll have a set budget also. Okay, we anticipate that you had X amount for this particular area, so for your mortgage or rent, etc. So it will calculate all of those figures for you and say, okay, well, this is what we estimate that figure to look like. Whether that's an actual, finite amount that actually applies to you, it's just their calculation of how it works. So it will go through all of those steps online, and you can actually calculate what that figure looks like rather than trying to guesstimate what amount it would be.
Okay. And then the last question, it looks like on my end, which, Crystal, you might want to check your chat box because you might be getting, a lot of these people are sending them to me privately. I'm just curious if they're sending questions to you privately that are different.
Okay.
But somebody asked what building you're located in.
Oh, okay. Yes, we are in East Harper, so in the Student Services Building, right off of the corner of 10th Street in Dartmouth. So if you come into the front, one of the representatives will, you can check in there and just let them know you're here to see financial aid, or me specifically, and they'll bring you back to meet with whoever's available at the moment.
Perfect. And it looks like I don't have any other questions on my end. I'll let you know if they pop up. But yeah, if you just want to check yours on that side. But otherwise, I think we got all of them.
Okay. Let's see.
So if you have any final questions, or maybe if you sent them to Crystal, if you want to send them to me, I'll go ahead and read them. But if we don't have any questions, I just want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this. I'll send you the recording in about a week or so once we get it all edited. And I'll also in that link send you, or in that email, send you the link to the next webinar if you're interested in that as well. No problem. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm getting some thank yous. So thank you as well, Crystal.
Right.
I really appreciate you taking your lunch hour to give us all this information and being willing to talk to our alumni, because I know debt is a big thing on their mind and they want to make sure that they get that figured out. So thank you.
Not a problem. I know how important it is. I went to school too. I had that debt. Luckily, I'm now debt-free, but hopefully we can get you guys to the same exact status. But I'm here, Rosie's here for any questions you have, and we just need to help you kind of translate any information you're getting from your loan servicer. We're happy to do that.
Perfect. Well, I don't know if you saw any questions, but I'm all clear on my end, so I think we're good to go. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.